I think a lot of people, including me, are kind of questioning like what is reliable sources and what really
Right.
aren't, especially when it comes to political things and voting, because it's so much out there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just so much information at once. It's like, well, do I believe this? Do I not believe this? So
So
I
much
think that's another
information.
thing that's kind of like, because we see so much every day, it's kind of hard to tell.
Totally. And that's where, number one, trusting your gut comes into play. And
Mhm.
whenever I read headlines, I think to myself, is this clickbait? Is
Yeah,
this the kind of thing that is
yeah,
probing me to click on it because it knows that I'm going to be inflamed if
yeah,
I read this? And
yeah,
I am always personally a little wary of inflammatory news. I feel like I much prefer more rational explanations of things and things
mhm,
that can cite facts. And of
yeah,
course, facts are always changing, but something, again, that Gen Z is so good at is calling out when something is claimed as a fact that isn't true. So if
right.
when you're scrolling through news, something jumps out at you as that doesn't seem quite right, look it up. It just takes a
Yeah,
couple more seconds. And definitely before sharing any of that kind of news with your audience bases, again, as you just said, whether you have one follower or 600,000, you have a platform. And if you
mhm,
share out information that might not be fact checked,
yeah.
that's a spread of misinformation.
Mhm.
So I would just say, like, if anything jumps out at you as kind of shady, Google it.
I feel like that's a good tactic because everybody pretty much has what's it called, access to Google. So I feel like that's pretty
It's
smart.
true. It's true. And I will add to that that a lot of people don't know you can search images on Google, not just by typing into the image feed, but if you click
Yeah.
into the Google Images tab and you drag and drop a photo in there, it can identify if something's been photoshopped or if something isn't
Oh.
real. So
Um,
yeah, you can, let's say you see a photo of a politician, and this actually happened fairly recently. Somebody's nose was adjusted to feed into stereotypes, and like that sucks. And so people were dragging and dropping the image into Google Images to see, does this person's nose really look like that? And they
um,
were able to see it was photoshopped. So
I had no idea. That's actually
yeah.
really cool. That's a really good tool. But kind
It's
of
a
taking
pretty
the conversation a different way. This year's a little different when it comes to voting.
it
The
is.
big conversation of mail ballots came out. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people are one, scared, and two, confused because it took me a while to understand because we're mailing stuff in. The process, if you're going to be mailing in your stuff, takes longer. So the election day isn't something that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people know. So it's just weird for a lot of people because we're so used to, oh,
Yeah.
we get school off today because we get to go in and vote. But now it's like,
Yeah.
is the date even in November? So it's like, yeah.
Unclear. Are we? Yeah, I
Yeah.
was. I was gonna make a bunch of jokes that I'm gonna bite my tongue on. But okay, first of all, Leah, I want to applaud you for even being familiar with that much information,
Mhm.
because not only are you a first-time voter, most of the people who are voting by mail this cycle are first-time mail-in voters. Vote
Yes.
by mail is really being leveraged because of the pandemic, and this is a first for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So just rest assured, you are going into this journey for the first time with a lot of other people, even seasoned
Right.
voters.
Right.
Um, but to that, I will say, there are a couple different kinds of voting that fall into the category of not voting at the polls on election day.
Hmm.
One of them is mail in voting. The two other kinds are absentee voting and then just early voting.
Right.
And all of them fall into the category essentially of early voting.
Hmm.
So for ease of communication, I'm just going to refer to this all as early voting,
Okay.
just so everybody knows, yourself included. Mail-in voting is allowed in a certain number of states, not in every state.
Hmm.
Absentee voting is if for any reason you can't be in the state on election day, you get sent a mail-in vote.
Right.
So in some states, you have to have a verified excuse for why you're not going to be able to vote at the polls. But what this all comes down to is in in both the pandemic and in the 2020 election, a lot of states are trying to expand opportunities for people to not be in person on election day.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these is by encouraging people to get mail-in ballots, or just early ballots. And forgive me if this is kind of a lengthy answer, but just stick with me. So there are two ways people can get their mail-in ballots or absentee. In one of the situations, the state will automatically send it to you because of the circumstances of this pandemic.
Right.
And there are about 6 or 7 states that do that. What state are you in, Aliyah?
North Carolina.
You're in North Carolina. Okay, so you are not in one of the states that's doing this, but that's okay.
Yes.
Because North Carolina does have mail-in voting and absentee voting. And, or I'll have to check about early mail-in voting. I'm pretty sure you do. But the other way people can get their ballots is by applying for them. And you can either apply for them by paper application or online, again, depending on the state you're in. So the number one thing I would recommend off the bat is find out based on the state you're in if your state requires an application or if you get it automatically.
Right.
If it requires an application, fill out that application as soon as possible. I'm not gonna talk for too long about what's happening with the Postal Service, but basically all you need to know is things have been slowed down a little bit, which means that actually sorting the mail to get to you is taking longer, and sorting the mail to get it to the Board of Elections is also taking a little longer, which is why the sooner you do it, the better. But I'm going to finish this little TED talk about mail-in voting by, that was not certified by TED, everyone, but just a figure of speech. But when you receive your actual physical mail-in ballot, you have a couple places you can drop it off. You can drop it off back at the post office, or you can drop it off if you Google for your state designated postal ballot drop-off locations. You can drop off there, or you can find out where your county Board of Elections is and just go to the Board of Elections and deliver it in person. If you do any of those mail-in or absentee options once you've gotten the ballot, well before the deadline of sending in the absentee or the mail-in ballot, your vote will be counted. So that's great. The goal is we want as many votes to be counted as possible.
Yeah.
What I would recommend with that, though, is because we are postal slowdowns, if you can't get the ballot in for at least a week or two, that the line for mailing in your ballot is, start to make your plan to vote safely in person, because we want to make sure that your ballots are counted. And another just last point with that is every single state has different deadlines for when you can start to apply for ballots and not apply for ballots anymore, and when you can send them in. And if you miss that deadline, your vote won't be counted.
Right.
If you're doing mail-in.
Yeah. Because every vote
was
counts.
A lot of information. Was that clear?
Yeah, that made total sense.
Okay, good.
A lot, because nobody seems to really be talking about the ins and outs of everything. It's actually kind of hard to grasp, because I think we're all, once again, just pretty much used to like, oh, we're going to this public school or this library and we're going to click some buttons and we're going to be out. But nobody really talks about like registering, how long it takes up to that now, since we literally can't go anywhere. So yeah.
It's so true. And I would also encourage, the best place to start looking up any of this information is your state's voter site. And usually you can use a drop down to select what county you're in. If you need to find out what county you're in, look up your zip code and type in county after that, just to find out and confirm. But once you have figured out that information, one of the best things you can do is share that with other people who live in your area. Because as you said, Aliyah, it is so difficult to find out this information and to make sense of it. Once you feel like you know it, tell people.